In spite of the fact that left-wing Twitter assures us all that a person cannot be both a Trump voter and a former Democrat, most people who follow my political journey already know that for the first 5 years of my adult life, and even before I could vote for myself, I was a reliable Democrat. I mentioned in my hashtag walkaway video that my mind started to change officially the day that I read Barack Obama's agenda. And now this has nothing to do with what he did in office, but when I started to read what it was that he wanted to do for the country and the fact that people would vote for this really started me rethinking what I felt and what I held valuable as far as politics go. My specific objection to the Obama administration was that even then, I could see that the intent was to transition the counterculture that I held so dear into an authoritarian power grab for the Democrat Party. And I only looked into it after a close friend alerted me that he intended to expand the welfare state off the backs of the people, like you or I, so people who didn't want to work didn't have to. In general, my party affiliations changed when I realized Barack was going to be too far to the left for me. So you would imagine my surprise when I saw this article. Not in the pages of a fringe website like The Mic or something, but right in the headline of the Washington Post. Now, I am not going to pretend that the allegation that Barack Obama, along with almost any other mainstream blue dog Democrat at this point, is a Republican plant is something that's new. Following my former governor Scott Walker's Facebook page for as long as I have, I started seeing it as early as primary season in 2015. And now this, of course, goes beyond the allegations that Tulsi Gabbard is a Russian Trump plant. But the more progressive among us have taken to internet message boards, especially those dedicated to controversial GOP politicians, in order to tell us that Barack's agenda didn't go far enough and that he was, in fact, a right-winger. I would attribute this to the radical agenda of Bernie Sanders, except they appear to have the same opinion of him at this point. I saw these opinions mostly posted by anonymous fan pages, otherwise known as the internet equivalency of this, and from that I generally considered them to be the ravings of far-left extremists and not the heartbeat of the party. But then I saw the WAPO headline and my whole worldview changed. Now, this article largely goes in the direction that we would expect with current events being what they are. There is a paragraph comparing and contrasting the policy proposals of top-tier candidates, and then comparing them to the former Democratic president. But the article begins to take the direction that it's actually going to follow throughout the next paragraph, because it alleges that because Obama is now looking at the field and the activists, he can now comfortably tell the left to slow it down, easing off on the woke culture if there's any hope to win elections going forward. And this, of course, means that he's fallen off the Democrat wagon and is no longer a believer in the causes that he once championed. However, the author, David Swerdlick, takes this even further later, suggesting that the former president governed as GOP throughout his 8-year tenure. The first point we talk about is, of course, healthcare, because Obama made headlines during his primary run by making health care for all a central part of his entire campaign. But as the author correctly points out, what appeared on the surface as a promise for Canadian-style single-payer turned into a program of exchanges run by the federal government and modeled after the Massachusetts system penned and passed by pseudo-Republican Mitt Romney just a few years before any of this happened. Swerdlick goes on to bring up the infamous bank bailout that the former president passed early on in his young presidency. This legislation, which was largely lauded by those who call themselves progressives today, was marketed to the American people as a protection from a long-term recession. In fact, though, the government throwing money at a problem to try and fix a stagnating economy in the style of the New Deal is hardly a conservative idea, but the author of the article sees it that way, given the fact that Obama's justification for it relied on the power of the free market. As Daniel continues, he goes on to address guns and gay marriage. While Obama led the charge on gun control and notably passed marriage equality, Swerdley correctly points out the fact that he flipped on both issues during his tenure. The gun control argument flipped after Sandy Hook, and marriage equality became a second term campaign promise. I do remember discussing with friends at the time who were still Obama supporters that Obama was going to help gay people get married, and it was the most important part to them of his campaign. Swerdlick goes on to criticize Obama's continued military presence in the Middle East. His campaign promise to bring troops home turned into a continued series of military actions in the region, though many of them shifted from soldiering and boots on the ground to drone warfare. The Bush-like policy of world policing remained throughout Barack's presidency. The Washington Post author closed his opening salvo by quoting philosopher Michael Oakeshott stating, "To be conservative is to prefer the familiar to the unknown, to prefer the tried to the untried, fact to mystery, the actual to the possible, the limited to the unbounded, the rear to the distant, the sufficient to the superabundant, the convenient to the perfect, present laughter to utopian bliss." He used this lengthy quote to rail against the former president for a recent statement, and that is the fact that the average American doesn't think that we need to completely tear down the system and reimagine it. Now, I've described about half of this opinion piece, and it's linked in the description below. I do encourage you to go on and read the entire thing, but for now, let's take a look at what actually happened during this so-called GOP administration. As I mentioned before, my first look at Obama was a sour one given the fact that I considered his agenda to be too far to the left. He did, in fact, have a plan for this country that would shift our nation far to the left, and even if it didn't happen within his administration, the path was there to get us in this leftward lurch within a decade. Obama may have used Romney's state model to fashion an economically shaky federalization of health care, but he also tried to force expansions of Medicare and Medicaid to get more people onto them, and he did so with a sort of quid pro quo by offering states massive aid to take the ACA expansions. In fact, Barack Obama has never been shy about centralizing power into the federal government. Common Core, the ACA, marriage equality, and religious freedoms and exemptions to laws that Barack put in place were all decisions that should have been left to the states under the 10th Amendment. And his continuation of Bush-era world policing, a la Assad gassing his citizens so he needs to be bombed, screams left-wing globalism just as it did under Bush, as a matter of fact. And while there were few laws put in place to enact this agenda, Obama pushed expanded college attendance under a federal curriculum in order to move us into a more global outsourced economy as our GDP and economic growth dwindled. Of course, all the while pushing an idea that those left behind by the changing model should learn to code while the government take care of them indefinitely. Now, I encourage everyone to read the Washington Post article that I linked down in the description below, as there's so much more information in this article that I could possibly do justice to in a video that's less than 15 minutes long. This article is a great look into how far left the country has shifted and also why Obama issued a stern warning against shifting any further left. In fact, the very same warning that inspired this article in the first place. Obama led an administration centered around globalism and central power, especially with his pen and a phone philosophy, and these are ideas that stand starkly against the GOP electorate in this country, especially the ones that have shifted to the libertarian side, even if these philosophies are currently indistinguishable from neocons like Bush. What we are seeing could be a Democrat Party that may be more focused on its more extreme elements than its core voters, and that is a party that is doomed to lose viability. But I do hope that the party leaders do heed Obama's warning. Above anything else, if we must have a federal government, I'd rather it be of two viable parties or maybe even more. One viable party means silent government that can pass laws at will without asking the people, and two or more viable parties leads us to debates and leads us to know what's actually going on in our federal government. What did you think about this Washington Post article, and what did you think about Barack Obama's presidency in general? I always welcome a thoughtful and positive discussion in the comment section below, and especially over on Twitter, that is @EdsBlogTwitter with a 1 in place of the I. Thanks as always for listening to this show and supporting this channel. And remember, never take the words of bloggers, podcasters, or journalists as gospel. Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions. Take care. You're